Good morning. In 44 BC, soon after the death of Julius Caesar, a comet was seen streaking across the skies of ancient Rome. And the soothsayers and astronomers confidently took the view that this was the immortal soul of Caesar heading towards the heavens and his imminent deification. Well, today we rarely deify our politicians, but we have with Mary Beard here the nearest thing to a kind of semi-deified classical don who has been... who first in Britain and then in the wider world has been held up as, in the words of the New York Times, a role model for women of all ages who want an intellectually satisfying life. Now, inevitably, that always hasn't gone down so well with some of the male members of the species. As well as becoming a kind of widely recognized British national treasure, Mary has also engaged in some epic Twitter gladiatorial combat with the trolls of not of ancient Rome, but of modern Britain, and has seen off the misogynists. Now, in her writing, and I'd recommend particularly her most recent book, which has just been shortlisted for a wonderful list of prizes, SPQR, which is really the summation of her life's work. And you must all go straight out of this hall and buy a copy, published in America by Norton. At the end of this book, she makes a passionate plea for us to look and recognize how much the classical world has given us. She writes, "Many of our most fundamental assumptions about power, citizenship, responsibility, political violence, empire, luxury, and beauty have been formed and tested in dialogue with the Romans and their writing." But you've also argued, Mary, that alongside all the good stuff, that Rome and the classical world sees the first examples in literature of a deep misogyny. Maybe you could just explain what you mean by misogyny and where we see it in classical literature.
I think misogyny goes right back even before the Romans. It goes back to the ancient Greeks, which is exactly what the word tells you. What it means is hating women. It's not sexism, it's not blokish banter, it's not chauvinism, it is hating women. It means kind of hating the things and the liquids that women give off. And I think it means, more than anything, wanting a world, and of course the Greeks and Romans were not the only people here, wanting a world, at least in the imagination, in which women didn't exist. It's about the eradication of women and what you find in antiquity. And I think that...
It's beyond sexism, it's a stage worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of spectrum here, isn't there? There's the sexism that you see on some of my Twitter trolls. There is endemic, low-level gender banter, which I suspect we're not going to get rid of very easily, and it's probably not top of my priority to bother about. Really, I can do it. But that shears off into something which is much more fundamentally conflictual. And I think it is wanting women not to exist, really. Now, I think it's quite interesting because there are quite a lot of cultures, the Adam and Eve story is only one other, in which we think of women as something that men have had to put up with, since they did something naughty way back, right? And I think there is no mainstream bit of culture. There is only, there's some marginal interesting bits of maverick feminism, but there is no mainstream bit of culture that really says that men were something that women have had to put up with since they way back did something naughty, right? And in fact, if you go back to antiquity, and it's where I think this is, it does help us a lot, I think. You go back to antiquity, of course, you find it's the men who are telling the stories about either women being in charge or women running communities on their own, like the Amazons. And why they're telling them is not out of any kind of sense of sneaking admiration for that. They're telling them either because it's completely and utterly ridiculous, or it's something to be absolutely terrified about.
You've also written very intriguingly about the urge right back in deepest roots of classical literature of men actually wanting to silence women, not so much hate them, but just keep them quiet.
Yes, and I think that's where I've actually come across some of the worst bits. You know, what they don't like about me is that I open my mouth. You know, it's nothing
Never.
else. That's it. And you go back to the very, very beginning of world literature. You go back to of Western world literature. You go back to Homer. You go back to the Odyssey. There's one extraordinary passage which people often elide when they're reading the Odyssey, because it's well worth reading, where Odysseus is coming back from the Trojan War. He's going to come back home to Greece. Meanwhile, his faithful wife, Penelope, has been left in control. She's been assaulted in all sorts of ways by people who want to marry her. She's been womanfully holding the fort while Odysseus has been away. She's not been taking a husband, and she's been running the show. At a certain point, quite early in the Odyssey, we see Penelope in her palace with her really wimpy son, Telemachus. You know, Telemachus, he's hopeless.
How old is Telemachus?
Well, let's say he's 16 going on 12.
A difficult age.
Right? He's at a difficult age. Penelope comes down and she asks the bard to sing something. She's wanting a particular song to be sung. And he says, "Oh, do shut up, mother.
Keep off the playlist."
Keep up. Speech is a man's matter. Right? Now, I think one of the reasons that I find the ancient world so engaging is not because of things I like about it, but because it really helps us get into the well springs of all the kind of prejudices and problems and discrimination and misogyny, if you like, that we are still the heirs to. Our idea that women should shut up, that politics is a man's world, not a women's world. We can't blame that all on the ancient Greeks. That would be mad.
But it's there at the beginning.
There. We've inherited it. We've rethought it. People who have formulated our idea of what politics is and what the right to speak is have done that in relation to classical texts which constantly want to silence women. And one of the things that I've noticed when I've looked at the particularly nasty versions of Twitter trolls that I've had is that often what they focus on is women's capacity to speak. So they say, "I will cut out your tongue. I will cut off your head." This suggests quite a lot of other very nasty things too, but they're focusing on women's power to make a noise. And I think that if we worked out our position in relation to the ancient world, we'd have a good basis for thinking a bit harder, I think a bit more sophisticatedly about what we think about misogyny and the silencing of women now.
In SPQR, this wonderful book, you start off by pointing out, which I hadn't really quite taken in, though I'm so familiar with the myth, that the Romulus and Remus myth starts, the foundational myth of Rome starts with a rape.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the other side of the ancient desire to silence women is the absolute unstructuredness of violence against women in the political narrative of both Greece and Rome. And it's very clear in Rome when Romulus has founded his city. It's a pretty tawdry and seedy affair, because he's founded the city, he's murdered his twin brother, he hasn't been able to get any men to come and join him, so he says every criminal can come to Rome, come and make a city, and then suddenly thinks, oh shit, I haven't got any women. And you can have one generation. This is where, bugger.
Criminals being exclusively men.
Yes, the criminals, of course, exclusively men. And this is where you come to that, oh, shucks, if only we could do without women, life would be better. But no, we've got to have women because we've got to have a second generation of Romans. So what does he do? He invites people, the neighboring tribespeople to Rome. In the middle of it, he blows a whistle, and all the young Roman criminals just grab the women. They rape them.
Sabine women.
The Sabine women. This is the famous rape of the Sabine women. And I think that modern culture has got quite a lot to blame itself for in looking at this, because you know, we have often tended to say, oh, this is abduction, not rape. You know, this was political good. You know, so it was all right then. You know,
it gave an excuse for Roman sculptures, of course, to reproduce this, and indeed Renaissance painters to do a lot of sort of quite sort of semi-pornographic painting and sculpture throughout the ages.
But what it means is that in Roman terms, the Roman city was founded on rape, and if you like, and this has, I think, a real resonance both in later Roman and modern discussions, you know, the rape of the Sabine women is in one sense the first Roman marriage. And in a sense it's saying marriage is rape. Now, that's obviously had you know, as an argument, it's had a distinguished and interesting history.
It's the foundation myth of Western civilization.
It is.
Sense,
Yes, marriage is rape.
And the
Or
rape
at
of
least,
Lucretia?
at least we have to wonder if it is. Because I think, you know, the Romans get a bit of a bad press in all this, and I've just been party to that, really. Because we tend to think of them as being, you know, militaristic thugs who don't have a brain cell between them. The Romans are constantly worried about this. They're constantly saying, well, maybe the rape of the Sabines was the first seduction. Maybe it was, and they worry, or they say, maybe that's why we're like we are, you know, that somehow we're committed to just grabbing what we want.
Go on to the rape of Lucretia, again, a kind of another fundamental central myth.
Well, basically, I mean, the basic rule with Rome is that every time you get political reform that is based on, at least in myth, it is based on violence against women. So when you come heroically to put down your tyrannical monarchy that you had in the early period and to institute, you know, the democracy of the founding fathers, what is the prompt to that? It is the rape of a virtuous woman. And I mean, if you try teaching Roman history to undergraduates and you have to give trigger warnings, I'm afraid you know, you have a hell of a lot of trigger warnings when it comes to these early moments of Rome, because they are founded. And I think they help us see why we are so, not founded, but how we can't quite escape, you know? Whether it's, you know, Donald Trump thinking that, you know, women's excrescences are very nasty, or whether it's people thinking that, even if they don't say it, that a woman could not be British Prime Minister or President of the United States because a woman has no right to speak. We are still debating some of those questions.
We hear a lot about the importance of looks in politics and in media. But one of the things that intrigued me most in your book is the way that you said that even Augustus, again, the kind of, you know, the founder of imperial Rome, this great golden figure whose face even non-classicists are familiar with, he didn't look at all like that. He was given the kind of Photoshop treatment.
Yeah.
He had platform heels, bad teeth, and was a dwarf.
Terrible spots. It's very nice, actually, to think of the most powerful man in the Roman world having awful acne trouble. I'm really pleasing.
You've been a good face for radio, really.
Great face for radio. But I think, you know, that's the other thing, that where you see a link between, you know, now and then is how can you appear as a man or a woman in the public sphere? You know, do you have to, you know, soften your image? Do you have to toughen it up? You know, what is it to be, and there were, I would say, almost none. What is it to be a woman in the ancient world who can speak for herself? Well, she has to be a man. And there's one very famous story about a female orator. She really wants to speak. How can she do it? She has to go into the forum dressed as a man. And of course, you know, that always rebounds on you, you know? Women still, I think, and you can look at, you know, Hillary Clinton's, you know, image analysts, it is hugely problematic to know what a woman in power looks like, and whether that's from the colour of her hair. I thought it's wonderful to see Christine Lagarde this morning, because the number of women in politics who do not feel they can be a woman in politics with grey hair is almost 100%. Now, Trump, of course, is the male, example of that, I suppose. I mean, I don't know what his hair is really, but but men can be, there's something, because there are many things mixed up here. There's gender, there's ageism, there's the kind of combination of ageism and sexism.
You yourself have always made a point and been cheered on by women because you, in your public appearances on documentaries, you refuse to wear makeup, you don't dye your hair, and your sartorial choices have been a subject for much discussion on British television.
When I did one programme, there was a review in the Sunday Times, which I read. Actually, I was in New York when I read it, and it said, I don't know if there's a programme on US television called The Undateables, but basically it's getting a load of people with appalling disformities to come together on dates. And the guy, A.A. Gill, looked at my programme and he said, she doesn't deserve to be on BBC Two doing a documentary. She should be on The Undateables. And he thought, and what I thought was very interesting was, he's a fairly conservative commentator, and to be fair, there were one or two, both men and women, who said, yes, she really could take a bit more care of her appearance. But the vast majority of people, when they read that, and when they read my response to it, were actually cheering me on. And I think what was important about it was it enabled me to say, as quite a lot of other women have been trying to say, look, guys, when you look at me on the telly and you say, you should be on The Undateables, what you're doing is you are looking at a 59-year-old woman. That is what 59-year-old women who have not had work done look like. Get it?
We have only 2 minutes left, but quickly, you've had much worse today, Gill, particularly on Twitter. You've had some really nasty Twitter abuse. Maybe you'd like to talk about how you've confronted that.
Well, I think you confront Twitter abuse in two ways. I mean, if they threaten to kill you, that's a criminal offence, and you ring up the police, and it's out of your hands. I am going to cut your head off at 9:42 tomorrow and rape it. The law is there to deal with things like that.
But the sort of stuff we've got behind us
this
now.
Kind of stuff. By and large, I've just stood up to the bastards, and with quite...
And won them round.
Well, not with total success, but with the kind of success that you can be pleased with. And I think one of these, Oliver, when I saw that, I said, I think you should take this down on Twitter. Nothing happened. I said, please, I think you should take this down. Nothing happened. Then someone tweeted, I know his mum, and I think I'll tell her. And it went down. And And the truth is, Oliver is not a wicked person.
He sends you chocolates now for Christmas.
He took me out to lunch. He apologised in writing. He sends me chocolates at Christmas. He was a disinhibited, drunk young bloke on holiday with his mates. And I think, I've had some tough times on Twitter, but I have concluded that more of the sexism on Twitter is by disinhibited young people than it is by the very nasty.
Ladies and gentlemen, please a big round of applause for Mary Beard.